So what if Jimmy Butler re-signed with the 76ers? And I mainly want to just talk about how Philly would look on the court, but to go over the other things real quick, the Blazers got Whiteside in the deal, so they'd have to find another big. The Heat probably find some way to get off of Whiteside. I highly doubt that he would be playing over Bam for another season. Miami in general doesn't look as good. If they don't get Jimmy, that's pretty obvious. They would probably still be scrambling trying to get a star player, and Bam would be certainly still exciting, and Hero and Duncan Robinson would be looking good, and maybe Dragic gets moved in this new scenario, but the real thing is Miami just doesn't have Jimmy. And then the other big one is Horford, where it's like, well, the Celtics, maybe they re-sign him. The Lakers had cap space at one point, but when they thought they could have got Kawhi, maybe they sign him. The Kings were rumored to go after Horford. You could convince me of a lot of things there. I don't really know. You could convince me that Horford would be better on some other team. You can convince me he'd be worse. That one is really up in the air, if you ask me. Just to state the obvious, Philly could not afford to re-sign Jimmy and then sign Horford. The other thing worth mentioning is that Miami holds on to a 2023 first-round pick if the Jimmy Butler trade doesn't happen. You could also argue that because the Clippers got Mo Harkless in this deal, that allowed them to trade for Marcus Morris later on, but I feel like they could have gotten Morris anyway. And also, Josh Richardson is still in Miami and he's not on Philly. The first thing to acknowledge is there is conflicting evidence on whether the Sixers actually offered Jimmy a max contract. Some reports say they did, other reports say they did not. We'll just say in this new scenario, they've offered it to him, Jimmy wants to sign, and he's there. Does that mean Brett Brown gets canned? Because there was that thing about Brett not wanting to coach Jimmy. Now, maybe that's wrong, but if that's true, then you could probably view that as a good thing for the Sixers. Brett Brown, not a great coach, probably not the worst one in the league, but not one of the best ones either. As far as who could have been the new candidate, I don't know. It's tough to remember a year ago who was available for coaches. But maybe bringing Jimmy back would have forced them to fire Brett Brown then. Starting lineup, Jimmy, Ben, Embiid, Tobias. Because I'm assuming that Philly still gives Tobias a max, and they let Redick walk for the sake of they've got to save money somewhere. The other thing to point out is maybe with this new team, the Sixers would get aggressive again during the season, try to make a move, but they also wouldn't have as many tradable contracts. It would mainly be really big contracts and really small ones, which makes it tougher to trade for a pretty good $15 million guy or whatever. And also, just to state the obvious, Philly would be re-signing Jimmy with bird rights so they could go over the cap, all that good stuff. If you want to be nice, you can put Redick back on the team and they just brought everybody back. You can say that Korkmaz takes over that spot, Thibault. Perhaps they end up making some other move. I don't know. But would that team be much better than we saw from this year's Philly team? I would imagine so. The spacing would be better. Shot creation would be better because of Jimmy. Also, the idea of just Jimmy's attitude and all the stuff that he demands from his teammates would be there, and Philly needs that. And I think the on-court relationship between Jimmy and Ben Simmons would be pretty interesting. In a perfect world, it's a little bit of both guys doing some stuff, whether it's Ben in the post or Ben setting screens for Jimmy or Jimmy setting screens for Ben, and these two tall wings who, the shooting might not be there, more so for Ben than Jimmy, but they just do so much in terms of attacking the basket, and they have so much versatility and shot creating and all that it's very, very difficult to deal with. And then if things get too tough, Jimmy can just go ISO or simple pick and roll in big situations. But there's also the idea that it would not go well. And you're looking at two primary ball handlers who just can't really coexist, because if Jimmy's got the ball, then the spacing isn't as awesome because of Ben and that sort of thing. Now, the reason I would think that wouldn't happen is, number one, we already saw it kind of work. If it's not for the craziest shot of all time, they're in the conference finals, maybe, against the Bucks. there was still an overtime to go against Toronto if that shot doesn't go in. And also because Jimmy and Ben are two pass-first guys. I mean, we saw Jimmy be effectively the point guard for Miami, if not technically the point guard for a lot of this season, and definitely in the finals. So I feel like they would really want to make it work between the two of them, and I think they would both be fine with sacrificing a few possessions with the ball to make it work in the end. I mean, we've seen Ben go into the mode of, I'm going to set a lot of screens. We saw him do it against the Nets in a round one series. The problem is that other times he kind of goes away from it. Like, you can tell that you have to hammer it home with him to do it. But I feel like, and maybe I shouldn't feel this way, but I just feel like they would eventually get him to commit to that if Jimmy was still on the team. Now, maybe it would have required firing Brett Brown to have somebody with the assertiveness to just be like, hey, Ben, I need you to do this a little bit more often. But yeah, I don't know. I'm feeling a little optimistic with this what-if scenario. As far as how all of this affects Embiid, well, you would expect some more Jimmy Embiid pick and roll. And Jimmy could actually beat you if you go under with just getting ahead of steam towards the basket or going with a pull-up or finishing through you to get a foul or whatever. That's another thing, is that if the Sixers had kept Jimmy, the free throws would have been overwhelming for teams. Because even if you defended them well, between the 5 free throw attempts that Ben gives them and the 10 or so a game that Jimmy and Embiid would give them, it'd be really tough to beat them. Like, they would kind of force their way into maybe a top 5 or 6 offense. Even if the offense would sometimes still look rough, they would just shoot so many free throws that they could get themselves up there anyway. And then defensively, we would think that they would be a menace. I mean, we saw the jump that Ben took defensively this year, being an all-defense guy, being potentially the most versatile defender in the league this year. There's certainly some other candidates, but he's on the list. And we know how good Jimmy is defensively, and we know how good Embiid is. So just those three, with Tobias as the other guy who can still be overpaid but chip in with a solid 16 or so points and not suck defensively, hopefully. If they could just get that one other guy who could just be respectable from outside enough, and they already kind of have it on the roster in this alternate scenario where it's like Korkmaz or Thibault for more defense, so the possibilities would be there. Also, Shake Milton. Do they discover how good Shake is in this new scenario? I guess they can. When I say how good Shake is, I mean like 13 points a game, but a guy who you have to guard and can do something off the dribble, right? So basically, I think if Jimmy is still on the Sixers, then they're way better. Now, do I think that Philly ends up making the finals in this scenario? It's possible. I mean, it takes Miami out of the equation. Would they have the personnel to go at the Bucks? I would think so. But whether they would have the coach to exploit Budenholzer is the question. Because, I mean, definitely give a lot of credit to Miami's players for what they did to Milwaukee, but a lot of it was also Spoelstra's game plan and taking advantage of Brook Lopez not being able to defend on the perimeter like that, and having Jimmy attack mismatches, of which he could still do if he's on the Sixers in this new timeline and whatever else. But you'd think they could still build the wall around Giannis. I mean, you're talking Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid, and Jimmy, as I mentioned before. So, I mean, in the moment, I kind of want to say that Philly would beat the Bucks if they met in the playoffs, if they had kept Jimmy Butler. But I don't know, because they definitely wouldn't have had a coach as good as Spoelstra. There's a chance they still keep Brett Brown. There's a chance they get somebody else because Brett doesn't want to coach Jimmy, but no matter who they end up getting, that guy's not as good as Spoelstra. So maybe the Bucks end up still beating the Sixers, I don't know. But the situation definitely looks better. We can all agree with that one. Could they beat the Celtics or the Raptors if they had kept Jimmy? I think so. The bubble still happens in this scenario, by the way, which certainly affects things in whatever way you want to imagine. Could they have beaten the Lakers if they beat the Bucks in this new thing. Could they beat the Lakers? I mean, I still think the Sixers or the Lakers would have the two best players, but maybe Philly's defense would be so tough at that point. Maybe. I mean, again, it's Ben, Jimmy, and Embiid. It's pretty tough. But I don't know. Regardless of where you fall in that one, they definitely would be better. Now, that being said, I did mention earlier, I think Tobias Harris still ends up getting a max contract, and he's still overpaid to hell, and I feel like you still have to take into account the idea of the 76ers front office, of which I don't know many of the people associated with it besides Elton Brand, but I guess that's all I really need to know off the top of my head. Find a way to mess it up, whether it's bad trades, giving away first-round picks, that sort of thing. As far as what would the Sixers' future look like beyond this season if they kept Jimmy, I mean, they'd be pretty locked into money, so they'd have to hope that Tobias Harris would just be better. And we would probably still be having the conversation of Ben Simmons' jump shot and all that stuff. And maybe Embiid is still having his moments where he looks kind of lazy or not in shape out there. For the sake of Miami, I don't know. They're still scrambling to get somebody. Maybe they'd be a little more desperate to go for an Oladipo or a Chris Paul or something like that. They would still have cap space after next season. So perhaps that would be their way to get somebody, even if they didn't already have Jimmy Butler. Although in the world we're currently living in, their odds certainly look a little bit better for that sort of thing. And then projecting the Eastern Conference, you're looking at Philly, the Celtics, the Raptors, the Nets, the Bucks as teams to be really good. So anyway, that's it. What if the Sixers had kept Jimmy Butler? I still don't know where Al Horford is in this situation. I really don't know. But shout out to him. That'll do it.